Greetings, everyone. This is Professor McKenzie again. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 9, which is the agreement. So we're continuing our deeper kind of exploration of contract law. The learning objectives for Chapter 9, I want us to understand what a contract offer is and how you can distinguish that from what are considered proposals or maybe invitations to negotiate. We'll talk about ways in which an offer is communicated. We'll also discuss the definiteness of the offer, how long an offer is good for, and then how an offer can be accepted, who can accept, and when that acceptance is effective. So those are the overall kind of like big picture kind of like takeaways that I want us to understand by the end of our discussion and reading of Chapter 9. So again, just to kind of review, when we talk about a contract, the ultimate goal is whatever the agreement is, you want it to be deemed an enforceable agreement so that should there be a dispute, you can go into a court of law and hopefully rely upon a judge that will interpret the agreement and look at the component elements and say, yes, you have an offer. Yes, you have an acceptance. Yes, you have mutual consideration. Yes, it's for a lawful, for a legal purpose, and everyone has legal capacity. So yes, this is enforceable. And whoever party breached it or did not perform as promised, I can either try and compel them to do what they were supposed to do or face whatever the appropriate punishment or remedy is under the law. So that's the end game. That's the goal that you're always trying to strive towards, is to fashion an agreement that is going to be considered binding, or another way to say that is legally enforceable. In addition to having contractual intent, there needs to be an element of what's referred to as an offer having some definiteness. So, it's very clear what is the offer. This is the specific car I'm selling. This is the specific, iPad or model of, whatever I'm selling, if it's electronics. This is the price, the quantity. Normally offers have to be definitive like that. But of course, with anything law related, as we'll soon discover, we do have some exceptions to the general rules that we are applying. If maybe by law or conduct, maybe if you're a retailer and let's say with your wholesaler, you have a normal course of business, so that maybe you don't, have anything like a specific agreement of offer, acceptance, consideration. You may just call up a wholesaler and say, look, I need this item, can you get it to me real quick? I had a mechanic years ago, and he just had a small garage in Winter Garden. And, when he would work on a car, as cars came in, oil change, maybe replace tires, muffler, whatever the car needed. If he didn't have a part in stock, he would call a local parts store and just say, hey, can you deliver fill in the blank, an alternator, or a muffler, whatever, carburetor. And so, that is something that, obviously he over time, that was a casual kind of approach. There was no definitive like, okay, can you explain to me what your offer is? What is the acceptance? What is the consideration? You didn't have to go through all that. So if you've established a normal course of business dealings, that will suffice. There's also the exceptions. It's called a requirements or an output contract, and we'll come back to these two examples. But with the requirements contract, that's where the buyer agrees to purchase everything it plans on selling from a seller. So, you're saying, look, you're going to be my source person for all this inventory or stuff that I sell in my business. The flip side of that is an output contract, and that's where you're agreeing to buy all of what a seller can produce. So maybe you're buying from other sellers as well, but from at least one particular seller, you're trying to agree, hey, look, I'll buy everything that you can produce. And again, what I usually have in class, I'll ask students, well, why would you do that? And my ultimate kind of, what I want students to kind of realize is that sometimes you want to be the exclusive provider for a particular good, and so that's why you might have an output contract. Martha Stewart, kind of like a celebrity in different capacities, but I know she has like a line of, I think, like cookware and homeware. And so I think, I can't remember, it's been a few years since I've even looked up any of Martha Stewart's, products. But I know in the past, I think Macy's and Kmart, when Kmart existed, they were kind of like, they had exclusive rights to certain types of products that Martha Stewart produced, her company. And so that was an output agreement. In addition to that definiteness and the exceptions that I just mentioned, offers also have to be communicated. So, the law doesn't recognize telepathy or some kind of sixth sense. You have to be able to say that I expressed or conveyed what the offer was that has intent, that has definiteness, unless there's an exception. So was it a verbal thing? Was it in writing? Was it communicated electronically? There's different ways in which you can do this, but you do have to evidence that it was communicated. When we're talking about the termination of an offer, revocation, when we speak of revocation, what I'm looking at here is, the ordinary offer may be revoked at any time by the offeror. In terms of art, the offeror is the one who is making the offer. The offeree is the one who could potentially accept or not. So I just kind of understand those terms of art. So an ordinary offer can be revoked at any time by the offerer, as long as it is performed before there has been an acceptance. So if I'm, selling my car, and let's say someone, they hear me, what my offer is, and they say, well, give me till Friday, I'll think about it. If I haven't heard from them yet, even though we're not at Friday yet, maybe it's Thursday, maybe someone else comes along and says, I'll buy it right now. What I can do is I can contact the person who said, I'll let you know by Friday. I could call them and say, look, you haven't said yes yet, so I'm basically terminating my offer to you. And that's fine, unless the agreement specifies otherwise, you're allowed to do that. The key thing, though, is that, if an acceptance has been made, then you're going down that road of saying that, well, okay, we have an agreement now, and you can't necessarily revoke it then at that point. So again, just kind of get that idea of as it pertains to termination of an offer. Other aspects regarding the termination of an offer, if there's a counter offer, that technically is a termination of the original offer. So example, this happens a lot in vehicle sales. So if I'm selling my car, let's say my asking price is $10,000. And so someone comes by, looks at it, and they say, okay, I like your car, I'd like to buy it. So we have an offer, we have an acceptance, we haven't ironed out the consideration yet, but we're getting there quick. And let's say that, the person says, well, I'll give you $8,000 for it. Well, as soon as that sentence is finished, the person who potentially could be the one to buy my vehicle, they terminated my offer of $10,000. And they effectively are kind of like throwing out a new offer of $8,000. And now, even though there's been no contract yet, and there's been nothing else has really changed, we are flipping roles now. And so the person who potentially wants to buy my vehicle has made a counter offer, and I'm the one that is now in a situation where, do I want to accept that counter offer or not? I could say, look, I'm not going to do $8,000, but I'll do $9,000. And let's say, so, by me countering the counter, I kind of go back into the role of being the person who's making the offer. Now it's a counter offer, not to be confusing. And then the person has to decide, do they want to accept that? And if they do, we've kind of like locked in. And so we have the offer, we have the acceptance, we have the agreed upon mutual consideration. It's for a lawful purpose, and assuming everyone has capacity, we're there now. We have an agreement that we can say is going to be binding at that point. Another way in which you could terminate an offer is if there is a specified period of time. If I say, look, you've got 48 hours to make this decision, and if 48 hours comes and goes, and I don't hear anything, then that offer is going to be lapsed, and at that point terminated. There is an exception called the mailbox rule, which I'll kind of talk about in a few minutes. But for right now, let's just say that if you go past that time window, then we're going to say that the offer has lapsed or terminated. If either party dies or becomes disabled, that acts as a termination of an offer. Or if there's a change in the law that makes whatever it is that you were transacting or potentially transacting illegal, then we're going to say that that's not obviously going to be enforceable in a court. So we're going to say that offer is terminated at that point. As soon as acceptance has been manifested, then contract arises. So you know, whether that's a verbal thing, it could be clicked, you know, it could be a click-through agreement like you see on the screen here, accept and install. You know, the law has been adapted to kind of, you know, recognize that, you know, acceptance can be in the real world, can be on a piece of paper, or it can be in the virtual world. You know, it can be done digitally. But you know, there has to be some sort of affirmative step to indicate that there is an acceptance of an offer. You can't just say remain silent, and if you do that, that's acceptance of my offer. That does not work. You know, no court is going to say that silence manifests any type of intent to accept an offer. This is a flow chart for those of you that are more visual in how you try and process information. You know, I tried to kind of make it, you know, like a flow chart so that you could kind of understand, well, what is this process of offer, you know, and then what are the potential, you know, responses from the person who could accept. So at the very top center, you see the offerer makes an offer. You know, so you know, me as the owner of a car, I make this offer. Do you want to buy this for 10 grand? Whoever hears it, you know, that's the offeree, the person who could accept. They have three choices. They could say, okay, I'll take it for 10 grand. And if so, that's an unconditional acceptance, contract arises. They might hear that 10,000 and say, there's no way I want a car for that much. I'm not interested at all. So that's a unilateral rejection, and so no contract. So I have to go look for some other buyer somewhere else. Or if you look at the center, you know, it says offeree changes, you know, or maybe adds terms. So now that's the counter offer. You know, well, I won't pay 10, but I'll offer you 8. You know, so now you see we're going through this flow chart, and so that's a counter offer. That's a termination of my original offer. And so now the offeree is making a counter offer. So they're now the offeror, and I have to decide, do I want to accept? I could unconditionally accept and say, okay, sure, I'll sell it for 8, and if so, contract. I could just unilaterally reject and say, I'm not selling it for a penny under 10,000. So I reject it, no contract. Or I myself, going down the center, could, you know, counter and say, well, how about 9? And you can see, you can kind of cycle through this until at some point, you know, at the end of the day, you know, haggling or negotiating, however you want to characterize it, maybe you come at a price that both sides agree upon, and then we have a contract. Like I said, this is just a visual way to kind of process it. You know, it's if it helps, great. If it doesn't help, I don't have it here to confuse you. But again, just understand, you know, the role of, you know, offer, acceptance, consideration, lawful purpose, and legal capacity in order to say that we have an enforceable or binding agreement. The mailbox rule. This goes to the form of acceptance. So if any of you have read, you know, any of the contracts that have been put before you, you know, so let's say you rent an apartment, you know, maybe you're purchasing a car and you're financing it, you know, whatever the transaction is, if you have like some kind of written agreement, or it could be a digital agreement, you know, if you've gone through and read all the particular provisions, which a lot of times people don't. Most boilerplate language in contracts today, there is a section that usually is titled mailbox rule. And then if you see that, almost all the time what comes after it is basically saying we are opting out of the mailbox rule. And what that says, and it's legal, you can do this. In a contract, you can say we don't want to be held to the standard of the mailbox rule. And if you sign it, then you're agreeing that the mailbox rule is not an option. What the mailbox rule is that, you know, let's say I'm selling a car, and so, you know, I meet with you, and let's say today is Wednesday, and I tell you that I'll give you until you know, Saturday at the end of the day, let's say 5 p.m. In order for you to acknowledge if you've accepted my offer of $10,000 to buy my car. So we leave the discussion. I go home, you go home. It's Wednesday. Thursday goes by, Friday goes by, Saturday goes by. You know, it's now Saturday night after 5. I haven't heard anything. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, okay, you know, we don't have an agreement. But let's say Saturday morning you woke up and you're like, you know, I want to buy that car. And so I'm old-fashioned, so I'm going to write a letter saying, you know, dear, you know, Presser McKenzie, I agree to buy your car for $10,000. It's Saturday morning, you know, so it's well before the 5 p.m. deadline. You seal the letter in an envelope, you mail it to me here at Valencia, stamp it, drop it in the mailbox. So it's going to be postmarked Saturday. Even though I'm not going to receive that till probably Monday or Tuesday, if my contract or agreement with you doesn't say we're opting out of the mailbox rule, I'm bound by that. Even though I said I need to know by Saturday at 5 p.m. and I'm not going to get your letter until Monday or Tuesday, that doesn't matter. The mailbox rule is just kind of like this quirky kind of like thing that is from a bygone era. And most modern contracts will just say we're opting out of it because we don't want to have to deal with that. If it's 5 o'clock on Saturday, you need to make sure I know that you've accepted by 5 o'clock on Saturday. Call me, hunt me down, email me, text me, do, I don't know, skywriting, whatever it takes. Find me and make sure that I know that you've accepted. Otherwise, 5:01 p.m. on Saturday, I then can sell it to anybody I want. So that's the mailbox rule, and it's an antiquated thing, but it still is kind of interesting, just as kind of like a novelty, in understanding that it is a variation of how you can potentially accept when a deadline is imposed upon you by the party that is seeking you to agree to something. So the law has been, modified over the years to acknowledge and recognize new ways to basically affect acceptance. So, certainly, you can do pen and paper, so you can, be old school and have kind of like, a hard copy contract. You can, dispatch acceptance over the phone. You can do it through traditional mail. You can do it through email. You can do it through a text message. I'm not aware of any contract that has been accepted through Twitter, but conceivably it's possible. And the key thing is that, as long as it's been dispatched or sent and there is some way to verify the time and date, and most, social media, platforms do enable that type of, preciseness. We even have automated computer systems. We've actually had that for decades now when you think of like just-in-time inventory. So, we've programmed computers, manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, so that these computers talk to each other. And maybe a retailer, as inventory levels drop, the computer just automatically places an order with a supplier or manufacturer. Look, we need 10 more units or 100 or whatever they need. And their computer just processes it and just makes sure that it gets shipped out. So we essentially have computers ordering from computers, but initially it has to be programmed, obviously, by humans. So acceptance can be in so many different ways now. And again, the law, it's a great thing with our common law system is that we do allow for, if there's new, standards or practices that occur in the marketplace, we can be adaptive and kind of blend those in to existing contract principles. The last slide that I have here involves auctions. And so in an auction sale, whether it's in the real world or if it's virtually like eBay or other auction sites like eBay, asking for bids is considered an invitation to negotiate. And so a person who's making a bid is essentially making an offer, and the acceptance of the highest bid by the auctioneer is an acceptance of that offer and gives rise to a contract. Now, if any of you have ever purchased things in an auction kind of like environment, real or online, you know that sometimes auctions are held either with or without reserve. So obviously, if there's without reserve, whoever the highest bidder is, they win the auction. So let's say I'll stick with my car as the example. If I put my car up on auction and I think, well, I want to get 10 grand or something close to it. If I offer it without reserve, and let's say the highest bid is $5,000, I have to honor that. Even though I think I'm losing money on the deal, that's what I've agreed to. More likely, if I'm selling my car, I probably will indicate there is a reserve. And usually the bidders don't know what that minimum amount is, but that's the minimal amount that the person who's selling this through the auction process, they would accept. So maybe I tell the auction house, look, I'm selling this car, I want 10 grand, but my reserve is 9. Anything that gets to 9 or over, I'll complete the transaction. So at the end of the day, if that's my agreement with the auction house, if the highest bid is 5,000, that person doesn't win the car then because they didn't meet the reserve price. Anyway, I hope this chapter provided some illumination on the acceptance component or element of a required, enforceable contract. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll be chatting with you in our next chapter soon. Bye-bye.